My mother turns 80 in 2021, and she needs a lot more help than she ever has in the past, so I've been helping her set up her finances and go through materials and, in general, help her prepare for the remaining years that she has. And that involves going through a lot of material from the past, rediscovering things and learning things for the first time, and seeing the repercussions of past actions that play out far into the future. And I bring that up in this overview of Monasterium, a game by Arbor de Fuller and DLP Games, because you also have that experience in Monasterium, where you make small choices, often at the beginning of the game, but throughout the entire game, and you never know precisely when something is going to be relevant again, and when the payoff might actually be, and how far ahead things might matter over the course of the game. Let me talk about it in detail. Here are some of the components of Monasterium set up and ready to play for a 4-player game. Each player has a messenger that starts at one end of the road that snakes between 5 monasteries. You are the dean of a cathedral school that has 24 novices in it, and you'll be trying to place these novices in these monasteries to gain reputation for your school. The game lasts 3 years, with each year consisting of as many rounds as the number of players. So in a 4-player game, each year lasts 4 rounds, with each player being the start player once in a year. At the start of a round, you are going to roll your dice, which in a 4-player game will consist of 1 die of your color and 2 neutral dice. With 3 players, you'll have 3 dice, and with 2 players, you'll have 5. So you roll your dice, you choose a number, and then you place all dice of that number on the appropriate space on the board. So in this case, I have 3 choices. Next turn, if I roll, maybe I get 2 2s, I would have to place them both in 2s, unless I want to use my 1 reroll for the round, depicted above my stained glass window here. Flip it over, and I reroll those dice, and now I have choices again for what I want to do. Eventually, I'm going to place all of my dice on the board, and so will everyone else. So maybe we'll have an assortment like this. And now, as the first player for the round, I am going to choose dice and take an action. The standard actions available to you are depicted on the board as well as on your board. I'll lay this board here in the middle of no man's land so you can see it. With a 1 action, you can place a novice on one of the monasteries. We'll get to that. That's somewhat detailed, and a lot of it depends on the other things that you can do. Standard action for a 2 is to take a soup token. Standard action for 3 is to take influence. For 4, take a rosary. And 5, you advance your messenger. So you take as many actions as the number of dice you take. You can take at most 3 dice from the numbers 1 to 5 and 1 die from the 6 area. If you choose an area that has your personal die in it, you must take that die. You cannot take a die from someone else. So if I were to choose 4, I could take these 3 neutral dice, but I must leave that red one behind. If I chose 5, I could take only this 1 5. 6s, you take at most 1 6 because 6 is a joker action that you can use for any of the actions here. You start with a few resources, so if I take 2 1s, I can place 2 novices on the board. The cost to place a novice is shown in the left-hand column here. I need 1 influence and 2 soup, or 2 tools, or 2 books. But, unfortunately, I only start with 2 soup. So, I can spend an influence and 2 soup and place 1 novice from the top row, because that is the cost for someone in the top row, and place him in a monastery that is adjacent to my messenger. So this messenger starts here. There's a path to this monastery and a path to this one. I can place this novice into one of the community buildings because I have paid for soup. He's essentially going to work in the monastery to serve others. If I had paid tools, I could place them in the workshop. If I had paid books, I could place them in the community room. The reason for placing them in different rooms, well, there's a few reasons. One of which is you score a different number of points and you gain a different bonus. So when I go into the community building by paying soup, I get 1 point and I gain a tool. So I'm setting myself up for the future. If I go into a workshop, 2 points and a book. If I place them in a community room by paying books, I get 3 points and a stained glass window from the monastery in which I just placed that individual. Oh, we'll talk about stained glass windows in a bit. Moreover, once I place someone on the board, I have opened up a space and I can use this action in the future whenever I get a 4. So if on my next turn these 4s are still available, which they might not be, I could choose all 3 4s and I could spend them to get any combination of rosaries and influence up to 3. My choice. So each time you place a novice on the board, you are going to open up some power to you. That was one action. One action was to place this novice on the board. I can place another one. I could spend a influence to place a novice from this row into the chapel. So in the top 2 rows, you're placing in the buildings. The top row requires 2 resources of the same type. The second row, 3 resources of the same type because you get different new actions. I'll talk about those in a moment. The third row, you're going to place novices in the chapel. Oh, if I spend 1 influence because I start with 2, I can take a novice from anywhere here and place them in the chapel. And when I do that, I open up this action here. When you take this action, so if later on I take a 2 action, I can take soup, or I can look at all the monasteries where I have a novice in the chapel, which is what that symbol is saying right there, and I can take a stained glass tile from one of those monasteries. In this case, I have only one choice because this is the only place I have a novice. But if I have a couple out here, I can take either of them as long as I can place them in my window. Again, more on that later. You can take this action at most once a turn. If, for example, there were 2 2s here and I took both 2s, I could do this once and then I must take soup with the other one. I could just take 1 2, do this action, hope that 2 remains when my turn comes around again, and now take this 2 and do this action again, assuming it were valid, because there are some restrictions on where you can place stained glass windows. Okay. Instead of placing this novice in the chapel, I could have paid 1 rosary, because you start with 1 among your resources, and I would choose any novice from the bottom, and you place them in the cloisters, that is the grounds inside the buildings. But to place a novice in the cloister, it must be adjacent to one of your novices in the building. That novice is essentially representing or supporting this one here. So the bonus for placing a novice in the cloisters is that you flip over this tile at the top, and anytime I take a 2 action in the future, I will score 1 point. So that sounds good, assuming I can get 2s. Okay. Possibly I want to open up other columns as well, so I can get many benefits from taking 2s and score a point each time I do so. But there's different reasons you're going to do different things. Eventually, all of the dice will be gone by people taking various actions, collecting resources, moving their messenger, or placing novices on the board. When you move your messenger, you're going to move as many spaces as the number of dice you use. So if I were the blue player and I took these, I would move 2 spaces. Each time you reach an icon on the road or pass it, you get its benefit. So this one right here, you can take any action available to you as long as you can pay the resources to do so. This one you get influence or a rosary. This one you get a soup, or you upgrade soup to tools or tools to books. That's some magical power there. Religion is good for that. Here you can take a stained glass window from any monastery. Doesn't matter. I'll mention again stained glass windows a bit. This final spot on the road, you can get another one of your dice because you can have at most 3 personal dice. And when you get this, you immediately roll it and put it out on the board so you can take that action before the end of the round. Or you can get 5 points. Maybe it's near the end of the game and an extra die doesn't matter, or you just think the points are better. Your choice. So you travel all the way to the end of the road. If you move the messenger again, bink, you teleport back to the beginning and start from there and travel across. Now, traveling with the messenger is important because, as I mentioned, you get bonuses, but in addition, you cannot place a novice in a monastery unless your messenger is adjacent to it or you have a novice already there. Once I place this novice here, I can move the messenger on and I can continue placing novices in this monastery, but I cannot place in this one right now because the messenger is not next to one of the open roads. I can now place in this one. And if I place someone in here, great, I can continue to move on and hope to place novices here as well, but I can also go back to these spaces. There are other reasons for placing novices in particular locations. Okay, so we'll continue taking dice until all the dice are gone. Then the start player chalice passes to the next player on the left. They will begin the next round, and when each player has been start player once, that ends the year. You advance the hourglass marker, which you could stand up, but it kind of obscures things. And you advance it to the next year, and you play through 3 entire years, and you do some in-game scoring. Now, what else are you trying to do? You're going to gain points by placing novices in rooms. You gain points if you get to the end of the road and choose that. You will get points if you place a novice in a cloister and flip over an action area, and then you use that action area in the future. You can gain 3 points by placing this novice and then activating that particular action. Lots of points all over the place. More importantly, you have these objectives on the side, and these drive a lot of action in the game because they score and contribute a lot to your possible winning totals. To score for an objective, you need to complete what is depicted on it for these bottom 2, or place a novice in each of the 3 locations depicted on the card. In this one, it has a building symbol for the blue monastery. And if you place a novice in 3 separate buildings in this blue monastery, you will score 14, 10, or 6 points, depending on whether you do this in the 1st or 2nd or 3rd year. So the earlier the better. But of course, to do this, you have to hustle your messenger over to this part of the board and then have the right resources to occupy 3 rooms. And of course, there's a limited number of rooms to go into because once a novice is in a room, no one else can go in there. You have other combinations where you scatter out a bit more. Here you need to be in the chapel of the blue monastery, and in the buildings of the yellow monastery, and in the cloisters. But to be in the cloister, first you have to be in the building, and then you can be in the cloister of the Technicolor building, the silver building. I'm not sure exactly. We just make up colors for the buildings. So those are the 4 different objectives up here. The game includes 5A cards, 5B, and 5C. So you got 2A, 2B, 2C. Here I need to, by the end of the game, place novices into 3 community rooms, which require books, which are the hardest thing to get, because you get a book only if you use this power to trade up, or you use your messenger on the board, or you place into the workshop area, which will give you a book. Okay, it's hard to get there, but you can do it, and you get all of 8 points. But you also get the points for going in the red room itself, and you get the stained glass tile, which can give you points as well. One more thing about stained glass. In this particular case, the objective is to get a stained glass of all 5 types. Let's talk more about these stained glass. I've mentioned it quite a bit here. Each player has a stained glass board that starts empty, and you're going to place stained glass in it whenever you get one. So if I had to advance across the board and come to this space, I can choose any stained glass that I want. You choose any row that you want, and you place it in the leftmost empty space. So I could go here, and then I get a bonus of whatever is shown at top or whatever is shown at left. So a bonus of soup or rosary, my choice. When I next get a tile, let's say I get this one, because I place a novice into the chapel, and then I use this action here, which lets me get a stained glass from wherever I have a novice in a chapel. I can go in this space, or this space, because again, you choose a row, and you do the leftmost empty space in that row. So if I go here, again, a rosary or a tool. And if I manage to complete this row, I again get the bonus, rosary or a book, and I get 5 points. Now, one restriction in placing stained glass tiles is that you cannot repeat a color in a row or column. So I cannot place green here or here. I can do this. Maybe next time I'll end up getting this. And now again, I get that bonus, influence or soup, or advance my messenger. And if I complete this column, I get 4 points. So you have multiple incentives for placing these stained glass tiles. And everything works together with you scoring for this book room. I get this bonus. I get a stained glass window. I want to complete this. I want to get this objective. I want to get these points, and I want to get those resources so that I can keep doing things. This happens in mini games. Eventually, you're going to complete the 3 years, and then you have Endgame Scoring. And this is another thing that will drive your choices over the course of the game. For each monastery, you look at it and see who has the most novices in it. In this case, it is the yellow one. And that player would score 5 points for having a majority in that monastery. In this case, let's say we'll do this. We tie 3 and 3. We each get 5 points because we're monks. We're not fighting. It's a friendly game. Let's say we build up over here. Let's set up some other things for the future. Okay. Again, I get a bonus because I have majority. Great. Well, the second thing you do is you look at the number of novices you have in the chapel of a particular monastery. You multiply it by the number of novices you have in the cloisters of that monastery, and then you double that number. So here I get 4 points. 2 in the cloisters, 1 in the chapel, multiplied is 2, multiply that by 2 is 4 points. Here, yellow has 1 in the chapel and none in the cloisters, 0 points. Okay, should have planned better. But there are reasons to go in various places and be in a chapel even if you don't go in the cloisters, because you score 1 to 15 points based on the number of chapels you have a presence in. Okay, finally, you get some points for leftover stuff. A book is 2 points, tools are 1 point, and everything else is a half point. In the end, whoever has the most points wins. There's a relatively quick overview of Monasterium, which I played 4 times on a review copy from DLP Games, twice with 2 players and once each with 3 and 4. I did not anticipate giving a complete overview all at once. I thought it'd be hopping back and forth from the board to me talking and so on, but I just went for it and ended up giving you an overview of everything. So to add a few more details to what I already said in terms of the actions available to you, here's a closer look at the player board. The top row, which is the easier one to get because you need to pay only 2 resources of a type, are generally duplications of the standard actions available to you, but now you can get that action with a different die number, so you can have variety in what you are doing if you get a whole bunch of the same die number. So number 1, for example, lets you move the messenger, which is the same as the action in number 5. Number 2, you get a rosary, which is the same thing as 4. Here you get soup, which is new. Here you get influence, which is also a 3. And then here you can upgrade, which is similar to the space on the board that you can reach with the messenger, but here you can upgrade only. You can't just get a soup. The actions in the second row are much better, but they are usable only once on a turn. Again, as I described, you can take a die, and if that same number is still there the next time it's your turn, you can take the die again and repeat an action in the second row, just as you can in the third row, but often those dice just don't stick around. So, this action here, you can move your messenger twice, which is great because you go across the board quickly, you get to the messengers you want, you pick up the bonuses as you move, and you get your die at the end of the board, and you have that die for the remainder of the game. So the earlier you get there, the sooner you get that die. And no one else can choose that die. So when you get one of your dice onto an action space, you know that that action is available to you and cannot be taken by another person. The trick is that when you choose a space, you must choose your dice. You can't just choose a white die and leave your colored die there. So often you want to leave the colored dice behind so that you can build towards certain actions that you know you can take. But again, you might say, okay, well, I can take one die definitely that no one else can steal, but I may as well take the action right now because I get the other neutral die there before someone else will take it away. Action at the end here, get 3 points, fairly straightforward. This one you can get 2 soup, 2 influence, or 2 rosaries, which is great because as you place more novices in the chapels or in the cloisters, the cost escalates. So the second time you place a novice in the chapel or a cloister, it costs 2 of the item, 2 influence or 2 rosaries. The third time you place one, it costs 3. And the fourth time, still 3. There's a limit to how much you are asked to pay. But it gets expensive for the later ones. So putting 1 or 2 of them on the board is very simple, but then the cost escalates and you might want to open up this space so that you can make that happen more easily. Or you go for this space where you can place a novice on the board for 1 influence less than the normal cost. So you can use this to place one for only 2 soup, tools, or books, or 3 of each, or you can place someone in the chapel for 1 influence less than would normally be the case. It does not give you a benefit for placing someone with rosaries since you don't pay influence anyway, but it's the only way to place a novice aside from using a 1 or a 6, since a 6 is a joker. All right, the space here where you get a tool, I guess that's good because otherwise you have to get soup and then upgrade, or place a novice in the community building, the soup building, because then you get a tool as a bonus. Otherwise, it's hard to get it here. But this has not been used much over 4 games. The other things, much more. Primarily these main 3. But of course, who knows if we're doing good things or not. Again, this row is just about getting stained glass from monasteries where you have novices in the chapels, and this just lets you flip over these spaces here. So, general overview is there's a lot going on that's initially unclear. The gameplay has been about 30 minutes per player, so our 2-player games did take about an hour, and the 4-player was 2 hours, and there was, not counting the rules instruction beforehand, and 3 players we finished in 1:15, just because we played immediately after the 4-player game. So we already had it down and just ran through it a bit faster. There's a lot going on, and we've gotten better the more that we played. The first game that we played, someone won with a score in, I believe, mid-70s. And then the next game, someone won with a score of 100. And then the third and fourth game, someone has won with a score of 130. So you will definitely make poor decisions to begin with, and then you'll get better as things progress, which is like my lesson from life at the beginning. You often make poor choices at first, and you learn from your mistakes, and you see how to adjust and do things better. That is often how these types of games work, and it's tough to judge the game after the first play because we played, and each of us, it was a 2-player game, we had, I think, 3 or 4 tiles in here. And it just seemed like, well, we didn't do much with that. That wasn't very useful. We didn't even get across the board once, so we didn't get an extra die at all. We were like, okay, well, this is kind of neat. I see how things come together. Well, let's play again. And we played again, and both of us completed our stained glass window, and one of us got the 2 bonus dice, or the 2 extra dice, and the other one got 1 and almost made it to the end, partly because one of the objectives was to pick up all of your dice. So you have an incentive to do it, and you see that things escalate and get better, which of course I should know because I've played plenty of games, but again, you see it in action when, as you play, and you're like, oh yes, this makes a lot more sense now. Everything kind of fits together, and you earn little extra bonuses as you go along. Of course, the more you move your messenger, the more bonuses you get, and that's a good thing. That is only going to help you do things more effectively when you take more choices, right? The more you build this, the more resources you get, and then you'll be able to do better things, and you'll get points for actually completing the rows and columns. Of course. How could I have not seen that? But again, I didn't see it. You just don't know sometimes. And then you play again and you see what's possible. And maybe 130 is really good. Maybe that's sort of typical and not really good. Maybe that's okay and we can do better in the future. It's hard to say because I don't know. I've played 4 times. We've certainly done different amounts of objectives. You have 6 objectives, and in one game I did all 6. And it felt really good to get them. Sometimes they overlap more than others. So the objectives that I had out here, you've got this green one where you're trying to get the cloister, 2 cloisters and a chapel. Well, to be in the cloisters, you have to be in a green building, which means you've already completed the green building here for this objective. And then this one you have being in a blue building. Well, hey, this one you want to be in 3 blue buildings. So if you've done this and this, you've pretty much already done this. You just have to set yourself up the right way. This one, kind of the outlier. So you have incentives for going different places, and you are racing for spots to get there and do things. And this is much harder in the 3 and 4 player game. The 2-player game has a different game board. Let me throw everything on the floor to pick this up and show you that the 2-player game board has much smaller spaces on the monasteries, so you have fewer places to go, but we never had competition for the spots in the buildings. We were always able to do what we want and go to the cloisters and get things done. Maybe we were just being too nice. But when we flipped over to the 3 and 4 player side, well, with 3 players, you cover some of the spaces, so you reduce the number of rooms available. And then we had a competition where we would fill up all the buildings around a monastery, or we would fill all the cloister spaces, and now you're stuffed. You can't complete something to try to get this objective where you were trying to get 6 novices in the cloisters, or trying to complete a certain objective by getting in a cloister here and a chapel here and so on. It was complicated just because there were more people doing things. You also had the question of the number of dice in the game. So with 2 players, you're rolling your personal die and then 5 neutral dice, which seems great because I'm going to roll, I choose a number, and then I'm going to re-roll and re-roll, and I have many chances to re-roll and hopefully get dice in the actions that I want to do based on wherever I've placed my novices and have opened up extra actions for me. So I'll just mention as a side note here that what you're essentially doing in Monasterium, I've blown out one of the stained glass pieces up top here, is you are building your own personal tech tree. Everyone starts with the same basic actions available to them up top, and as you remove novices on the board, you are making some numbers more valuable because you will score for doing those particular number actions, but you will also create different combinations of what is available to you. I know that if you get a 4, well, you can get a rosary, or you can move your messenger, or you can get a stained glass from that action. You've got lots of choices available to you, which makes 4s more valuable for you than they might be for me. But of course, if I get a green 4, you can't take it at all. So I can lock that in. And so that gives you a reason for sometimes why you're placing one die or another and why you want to reroll is to get everything laid out so that hopefully you can choose the dice that you want and then carry out actions on a turn. But of course, other people may just take those dice before you. There's lots of things going on and meshing all together and just playing out in interesting ways. You have to be flexible in terms of your plans, just because often the dice are not available, either because you don't roll them or someone else takes them. If you are fourth in player order in a 4-player game, you have a good sense of what's not going to be available by the time your turn comes around, which again is where the dice of your color become valuable, because you know that action's available to you, and maybe you do something else first and build towards that locked-in action. Although, sometimes the colored dice are bad, because that means you can't take the neutral dice that you might want. We often had a situation where you would have someone else's colored dice on the 6, and then lots of neutral dice, and you knew that they could not choose the neutral dice on the 6 because they have to pick their colored dice first. And you can take only 1 6 at a time because it's a joker and the best action available. So you might take the neutral die, and then you start working towards other things because, again, it's a neutral die. Joker, you can do whatever you want with it, and you can go towards the other things later. You might roll a 6 on your color die, and that's great because you lock in that joker, but that means you can't take the neutral ones before someone else will. Lots of little dynamics that come into play with the dice placement. I could see how that'd be frustrating for some people since, of course, it's random. You get at most one reroll, and you're stuck with it, and you have to adjust based on whatever is available to you. But often, as you start opening up the spots on the board, you can be more flexible in how you move things around. And I can get a tool by upgrading soup, by moving my messenger, or I can get a tool by placing novice in the suit building, or I've got that special tool action that might be available to you. There's things sort of all over the place, and you can stitch together the different mini actions in order to take the larger action of actually placing a novice on the board, which really feels like the main thing that you were trying to do. And that gets you to the weird feeling of that initially being only a 1. And it feels initially like you just want 1s and 6s. That's all I want because this is the best action available. And the 6, of course, lets me use the 6 as a 1 for this best action. But to place a novice on the board, well, I also need influence, or I need rosaries, or I need soup. Oh, I was reading that was soup because I'm looking only the bonus tile. Or I need my messenger at the right monastery so that I can start building from there. So all the actions are valuable, but you initially definitely overvalue the 1s and the 6s because you then get novices on the board. And in the first game, we didn't spend much time opening up this second row with these more powerful actions. We just did a bit more here, which is possibly why we scored so low, because these actions are much better. Being able to place a novice without playing an influence, of course, that means I need to spend fewer actions to pick up influence. Or moving the messenger twice, well duh, that's better than picking up this one, where you only get to move it once. So these are all upgraded actions, and you just need one more tool to make it happen. So you might want to spend a little time getting that tool, or the soup, or the book, in order to place that novice first, which we didn't see. One thing I didn't mention, I mentioned you have 20 novices on the board. Well, 20 spaces are in these columns 1 to 5. You also have ones at the end here. If you place all 5 novices in a row, you then immediately place this 6th novice on the side, following the rules of placement, but without having to place any tiles. So if you haven't been in a monastery and your messenger is not next to it, you can't place this 6th one here. But if you have had a novice, or your messenger is there, go ahead, drop him in. Boom! He appears instantly. Kind of amazing how that works. If you can place him in a cloister as long as he is next to one of your novices in a building. So you follow all the standard placement rules, but you just pay no tiles for that. And that will get you more people on the board, which again, we didn't do much of in the first game. We didn't do any, I think. But second game, third and fourth game, I think at least one person ended up emptying 2 rows and placing 2 bonus people on the board. It's great, and you get to plan a lot better and see how things fit together as you go. It also matters how quickly you get these bonuses up here. But the only way to get these bonuses is by placing the novice in the cloister, and the only way to place in the cloister is to place one in a building. But the sooner that you can flip up one of these, the more points you will score from these actions over the course of the game. It's just throwing extra points your way. And of course, it's great to have points, and that's going to affect what you're going to do, and you'll see how everything fits together more as you play. At least you hope you will. So again, I played 4 times. That third game, we ended up with 3 people right around 130. Someone else, new player, further back. And then we played again for the 4th time, and I got to 100. And the winner got to 130. And we were trying to figure out, like, what did I do wrong that I wasn't higher up on the poll? I completed 3 objectives. Okay, I think the winner only did 4, so that wasn't a huge difference, but it was some difference. The winner had upgraded 3 or 4 of these, so they were getting little points every turn that they were going. It was all just like little bits adding up, every little bit over and over again. And I mentioned how those early choices play into everything that goes later in the game, and you definitely see that from what's available to you and which actions you open up where you can get the church tiles, the stained glass tiles, based on where you are in chapels. That becomes super important. And how you place the stained glass tiles in here becomes important because you adjust the number of stained glass tiles based on the number of players. You have 2 per player, so 4, 6, or 8 in the game, and if it runs out, it runs out. And we had some situations where the red was all gone, and I had these certain colors in, and I needed a green exactly to fit in this space, and there was 1 green left. So it becomes very important in the timing, can I get things going in order to pick up this stained glass? Other people will take away the things you need. They will take away the building spaces you want to go in, the cloister spaces you want to go in, the chapel spaces, because those are limited as well. The stained glass is limited. The dice are limited. Everyone is taking away things from everyone else. They are being very aggressive while also trying to be very holy, apparently. Or at least representing that. It's the other novices who are doing bad things. You were the dean of the cathedral school, and you were doing nothing wrong. Anything else to mention? Probably. There are some wonky little rules that you have to keep in mind that are hard to do initially. We forgot over and over again that you can only take these actions once each, even though it clearly says 1 time. People would take 3 dice and be like, okay, I'm going to move my messenger ahead 6 spaces. And you say, no, you're not. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's right. And it would happen over and over and over again. You would forget, oh, I have to place all different colors. I can't place a green in the same row or column. Okay, well, I had to remember that. Additionally, when you're getting the stained glass tiles, if you're doing it from this action, you look and see where you have novices in a chapel, and you can choose from any of those monasteries. So you have choices based on what you've done previously. When you do this action, the 3 action, you have to take a stained glass tile from where the monastery where you just placed this person. So that's very restrictive. And if you can't legally place it, then you just don't get it. And then this action, where you get a bonus stained glass tile, you can take 1 from anywhere. So it's the wonky little rules that you have to remember as you're playing the game. There's 3 ways to gain stained glass tiles, and they are 3 different rules for how to get the stained glass tiles. You have the Endgame Scoring, where you are scoring based on the number of novices you have in chapels times the novices you have in cloisters times 2, and you do that for each monastery. It just seems like little difficulties where everything is, I guess, mathed out to make it even, to push you in certain directions for what you're trying to do. Again, if you get one novice in a chapel and one in a cloister, that's 2 points, because 1 times 1 times 2. All right. You drop another one in there, now it's 4 points. You drop another one in there, and now it's 8 points if it's 2 and 2, or it's 6 points if it's 1 and 3. All right. So it's all like little incremental bits, but maybe you place that novice somewhere else and it will get you a majority for 5 points, which could be better. Or you place it down here and you have to worry about that. So you've got these little mathy bits over and over again of what's slightly better here and what's a little bigger here and so on. But of course, if it's the second year, I don't know necessarily what I'm going to do the rest of the time to score in other ways. Am I really going to try for all 5 chapels? Am I really going to push for a huge cloister chapel multiplication score? I don't know. It's hard to put all together, and then of course it just depends on what stuff is available to you. If you don't get those rosaries, you're not going to be placing them in the cloisters, except if you empty out a row and get that bonus novice. As you can see, my talk is all over the place, which is possibly where your mind will go the first time you play this game, because there is a lot going on. I've said that before, which possibly means that I should stop and let you absorb all that I have said.